and welcome to Play This, a Talk This podcast production. This week, in our investigation of gameplay as storytelling, we will be looking at Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony, also known as New Danganronpa V3, everyone's new semester of killing, a PlayStation 4, Vita, and PC game from 2017. And what happens when you take the Hunger Games, anime tropes, and the Scream, and smash them all right through the fourth wall. Ah! If you've never heard of Danganronpa, your life is probably going better than mine, but let me give you the rundown. V3 is a sequel/soft reboot of the Danganronpa franchise. Each of the main 3 games stars a new cast of 16 extremely talented high school students, who boast such typical abilities as swimming, photography, playing tennis, programming, playing piano, and bending the universe to their will through the power of luck. You know, normal stuff. These 16 students are ripped from their daily school lives and trapped in a killing game by a murderous robot bear named Monokuma. In order to escape and return to the outside world, a student must kill a fellow classmate and then avoid being caught in a class trial. If they are named the culprit by majority vote, they face a disturbing yet darkly appropriate execution. If they manage to pin the blame on another, they win and are allowed to leave while the rest of the students face execution in their stead. I could talk about many moments in this game or its predecessors where gameplay works for storytelling, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes ham-handedly.
Cause it's a game!
Don't fuck with me! That's not even possible!
In V3 alone, I could talk about how the Death Row of Despair minigame taunts you, how the new lie mechanic illustrates the game's themes, how you have to literally not play the game at the end to succeed, but today we're going to be talking about Chapter 4, and how the gameplay restructures the relationships and power dynamics that had settled among the students up to that point. Now, before we do that, I want to put something out there so that we all understand each other and we can just focus on the analysis. I think that Kokichi is a great character.
Yes!
And I think that Kaito is a great character.
Alright!
Did I just blow your friggin' mind? Did you even think it was possible to appreciate both Kaito and Kokichi? You wouldn't if you wandered into the comments section of some Let's Plays. But I wanted to put that out there at the start because Chapter 4 shows both Kaito and Kokichi at their absolute worst as people, and that can be polarizing, even though it's great for their character development. With that out of the way, let's talk about Chapter 4, and specifically how the gameplay viscerally reinforces the disintegration of Kaito and Shuichi's friendship, and the way it sets Kokichi into a position of absolute power. Let's look at the context so we don't get too confused if we haven't played the game. Chapter 4 is a beautiful little example of how effective dramatic irony can be. The audience is privy to 2 pieces of information that their player character, Shuichi, is not. First, Kaito, a character who had been a kind and straightforward presence from the beginning and became Shuichi's one-man support system from Chapter 2 onwards, is dying. Shuichi takes his strange behavior from the previous chapter to be due to his fear of ghosts. The audience, meanwhile, sees a scene where Kaito coughs up blood into his hands and therefore knows the true situation. Second, Kokichi, who had been mostly providing comic relief and creepy faces from the sidelines before this chapter, teams up with Monokuma. At the beginning of Chapter 4, he steals the motive for murder from the other students to use himself, but later tells Shuichi and the rest that he didn't know how to use it. The audience, meanwhile, is privy to a scene where Kokichi offers a way to make the motive more interesting for the killing game to Monokuma. Essentially, to wrap up, the audience is aware that Kaito is feeling much weaker than usual, and Kokichi is feeling more powerful, while Shuichi is blissfully unaware that anything has changed. Shuichi's insecurities and the pressure of his position as ultimate detective in a murder mystery game keeps him wrapped up in his own head. And this is not helped by the results of the previous chapter, leading to all his fellow students placing all their faith in him rather than
Atua!
Seesaw.
But the player, having these 2 pieces of information, can see the ways he is manipulated by Kokichi and the ways he unintentionally ignores and pushes Kaito away. And with all of this happening, a student is killed, the investigation is carried out with Kokichi inserting himself between Kaito and Shuichi as much as he possibly can, and the trial begins. Let me explain how the trials work from the gameplay perspective. The main portion of the trials are what are called non-stop debates. Your classmates will talk one after the other, and you have to figure out who's right and who's wrong. There are a few alterations on this format that pop up. The mass panic debate is literally the same thing, except 3 conversations are happening at once. The rebuttal showdown is a one-on-one debate that happens when one person particularly disagrees with you. The scrum debate pits one team against the other in a direct battle over a major issue. There are also 2 other unrelated but important mechanics. The closing argument, where you summarize the case by filling in pieces of a comic, and argument armament, which is the final rhythm game fight against the most resistant party, usually the killer, but sometimes not. The player is also sometimes posed with questions where they must choose the right piece of evidence, the right answer, the right person. There are also mini-games where you drive a taxi through your mind and other weird stuff, but they aren't super relevant here, so just forget about it. To make non-stop debates actually interesting, the wrong/right statement is usually pretty evenly spread among your classmates throughout the trial. Nobody is always wrong or always right. If you knew that you always said no to Kibo, you wouldn't have to think very hard.
Hey!
That's homophobic.
Except this trial. In this trial, especially in the second half, after you get through the whole tedious, wow, the virtual world loops, what a freaking concept.
Yes, that's it. The virtual world is a loop.
Wow.
Thing. You're nearly always forced to disagree with Kaito. When Kaito is right, the agree prompt is still given to someone else. To put it into numbers, there are 7 disagree prompts in this trial. 4 go to Kaito. There are 2 rebuttal showdowns, 1 versus Gonta, 1 versus Kaito. In the scrum debate, Shuichi and Kaito argue directly against each other for 2 of their 3 points. And finally, the argument armament is against Kaito despite him not being the killer. For Kaito, whose brash confidence and compulsive need to be needed by people is mostly a cover for his own vulnerability and insecurity, being literally shot down over and over again by someone who has always previously needed his support in favor of someone who stands as the opposite of everything he believes, well, it's pretty much the worst thing that Shuichi could do to him. Yet Shuichi, whose understanding of emotional politics is lacking, to say the least, is entirely focused on the case, not weighing his words and their consequences outside of the case, instead taking the most direct route to the truth. That's not necessarily a bad thing, mind, or something you can hold him responsible for, but he's already done too much damage by the time he realizes that he's done any damage at all. However, the player knows exactly what they are doing, and every time is forced to physically break apart the central friendship of the game just by playing the game. That would be enough on its own to make this worthy to talk about, but there's one more segment that, in addition to breaking apart the friendship, also lets you know just how much Kokichi is leading his classmates by the nose. After most of the discussions are done, Kokichi prompts you into a process of elimination game to definitively demonstrate the killer. Shuichi, and through him the player, must sentence Gonta to death, one question at a time, all by the gleeful lead of Kokichi. There's a similar sequence in Chapter 4 of Danganronpa 2, where Nagito, the Kokichi-like character of that game, literally seizes control from the player, essentially running through a closing argument with the text auto-advancing until he is finally cut off. Both of these moments are meant to illustrate the power these characters have, since they both knew the killer and the murder plot from the start of the trial pretty much, and they are both demonstrating their superiority complex, Nagito's newfound and Kokichi's possibly partly feigned. However, I do feel like Kokichi's works better because it technically leaves the player control. It is simply that they must control Shuichi to dance to Kokichi's beat. Danganronpa always works in patterns. Even if you hadn't gone through Kokichi's process of elimination by yourself, You may have guessed that Gonta was going to die this chapter simply because the burly character always dies in Chapter 4 of Danganronpa. The mystery, ironically, is not the point of this trial. Instead, it's about the dread. It drives the story to its tipping point from which the player knows there is no return, and it makes the player push it there themselves with gameplay rather than only through the writing. If you liked this video, why don't you hit the like button and share it with your friends, and subscribe for more content coming soon. Still in the works are videos about Nier Automata, Iconoclast, The Last of Us, Fire Emblem Awakening, and more. If you have a suggestion for a topic to cover, leave it in the comments. If you can't wait for the next video to hear my amazing voice, check out our main podcast, Talk This, where my sister Madeline and I talk about different games every week. Available for download on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Spotify, and more. Follow us on social media for updates and other fun content. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Talk This Podcast. And if you want more Danganronpa V3 specifically, I wrote 3 posts about it on our blog, expressing my thoughts about the ending, characters, and
Seesaw.
just check the description down below for all the links you need. So until next time, I wish you happy playing.
'Cause it's a game!